The winter wind moved through the valley like something alive. It slipped beneath doors, rattled loose fence wire, pressed cold fingers against every window in Mason Creek. By sunset, most homes in town already carried the glow of supper lamps, warm kitchens, stew pots, laughter drifting through thin walls. But at the far edge of the valley, beyond the church road and the frozen creek, one house stayed dark longer than the others. The Whitmore place. The barn leaned slightly now. One side of the roof had nearly collapsed beneath old snow. The fences sagged toward the ground like tired men, and inside the house, Clara Whitmore sat alone at the table with her son. The soup between them had gone cold. She stared at the empty chair across from her, without realizing she was doing it again. Eli noticed. He always noticed. The boy quietly reached for the breadbasket, pretending not to look at the chair his father used to sit in, outside. The wind struck the windows hard enough to shake them. Clara finally blinked, then looked down at the bowl in front of her. There wasn't much in it. A few potatoes, thin broth, nothing more. The farm had been dying slowly since Thomas Whitmore was buried 3 winters earlier. Not all at once. That would have been easier. Instead, things disappeared piece by piece. 1 horse sold in spring, 2 acres lost by summer, then tools, then livestock, then sleep. Clara carried the rest alone. Most mornings she woke before daylight, fed chickens in frozen mud, pulled water from a stubborn well, fixed harnesses herself, because paying someone else was no longer possible. She never complained in town. That was important to her. People could pity a widow, but once they smelled weakness, they never stopped. So she stood straight, spoke politely, kept working, even when her hands cracked open from winter cold. Even when the loneliness inside that house became so heavy, it sounded louder than conversation. Eli shifted quietly in his chair. "Mama," she looked up. "The fire's going out again." Clara turned toward the stove. The flames had nearly disappeared beneath gray ash. She stood immediately. Her body moved with the discipline of someone too tired to hesitate. Eli hurried beside her, carrying 2 small logs in his arms. Too heavy for him. He stumbled once, nearly dropped them. Clara caught the wood before it hit the floor. "You're getting stronger," she said softly. The boy smiled a little at that. Together they knelt beside the stove. The room glowed faint orange as Clara pushed fresh wood into the dying fire. For a moment neither of them spoke. Only the sound of crackling wood, wind outside, the kettle trembling lightly above the flame. Then Eli looked toward the empty chair again. "Do you think Pa liked winter?" The question landed quietly in the room. Clara kept staring into the fire. "Your father hated the cold," she finally said. Eli smiled faintly. That made her smile too. Only a little, the first time holiday. By nightfall, snow had begun falling harder across Mason Creek. The town saloon glowed bright with music and conversation. Wagons lined the road. Lanterns swung in the wind. Clara pulled her coat tighter around herself as she stepped out onto the porch, with a basket of laundry stiff from freezing air. Across the road, 2 women stood beneath the awning of the general store, talking softly. They stopped when they noticed her. One whispered something. The other looked toward the Whitmore farm, with pity that barely hid judgment. "Poor thing," Clara pretended not to hear. Then came the quieter voice. "She still keeps his chair out." A pause. Maybe she forgot he's dead. The women laughed softly. Not cruel laughter. Worse. The kind people used when they believed grief had made someone strange. Clara stood perfectly still on the porch. Snow gathered slowly across her shoulders. She could have answered, could have defended herself. Instead, she lifted the laundry basket and went back inside. The door shut gently behind her. Eli was all asleep at the table, one small hand still resting near the soup bowl. Clara carried him carefully to bed. The boy wrapped his arms around her neck, even while half asleep. That nearly broke her, not because he held on, because no one else had touched her in months. When she returned downstairs, the fire had weakened again. The room looked too large with only one person inside it. Clara sat near the stove and began mending an old coat beneath lamplight. Thread through cloth, needle through worn fabric. Again, again, again. The same way she survived everything now, quietly. Hours passed. Then somewhere outside, through the wind and snowfall, came the sound of hooves. Clara froze. The horse stopped near the porch. Silence followed. Her hand instinctively reached beneath the table, where Thomas's old revolver still rested wrapped in cloth. Another sound. Not pounding, not shouting, only boots stepping slowly across snow. Then a voice, low, tired. "Ma'am." Clara stood carefully. The lamp flickered beside her. "Ma'am, could I trouble you for some water for the horse?" She moved toward the window slowly. At first, all she saw was darkness and falling snow, then the shape of a man beside a tired horse. Long coat covered in frost, hat dusted white, shoulders bent slightly from cold and distance. Not drunk, not aggressive, just exhausted. Clara opened the door only a few inches. "We don't have the much to spare." The stranger nodded once. Understood. His voice carried no disappointment, no pressure, just acceptance. Clara looked past him toward the road. The storm was worsening quickly. Evening winds moved across the valley hard enough to erase wagon tracks behind him. She opened the door wider. "There's a trough beside the barn." "Thank you." "Ma'am." He touched the brim of his hat once, then led the horse quietly toward the barn without another word. Clara watched from the doorway. Most men in town talked too much, especially around widows. This one barely seemed interested in speaking at all. She closed the door again, but after several minutes, she found herself returning to the window. The stranger had removed the saddle carefully from the horse despite the cold. His movements were steady, unhurried. The animal leaned against him heavily. The man checked its legs before his own hands. Clara noticed things like that. People revealed themselves in small moments. An hour passed, then another. Still no sound from outside. Finally, Clara wrapped herself in her coat and stepped back onto the porch, carrying a lantern. She rounded the barn carefully. The stranger was sitting against the wall beneath the overhang, tightening a broken leather strap near the saddle. His gloves were worn through at the fingertips. The horse stood nearby, chewing hay slowly. "You're still here," Clara said. "Storm's bad." He said it simply, not asking permission. Clara lifted the lantern slightly. The light revealed his face properly for the first time. Older than she first thought, maybe 40. Dark beard touched with gray, a scar near one eye. Tiredness settled deep into him, but his eyes stayed calm, like a man who had already survived worse weather than this. She noticed something else then, the north fence. One entire section that had collapsed earlier that week now stood upright again beneath fresh snow. "You fixed that." The man glanced toward it, was leaning too far inward. Would have snapped by morning. Clara looked at him quietly. Most men in town had passed that broken fence for days. Nobody stopped, not even for money. "What's your name?" she asked. "Silas Reed." "You passing through?" "Looks that way." The answer carried something lonely inside it. Clara looked toward the storm darkening around them, then toward the barn, then back at him. Finally she spoke. "You can sit by the fire, if you'd like." Silas did not answer immediately, almost like nobody had offered him that in a very long time. Snow moved softly between them. Then he nodded once. "Thank you, ma'am." Inside the house, warmth gathered slowly around them. Not real warmth yet, just enough to survive. Silas removed his gloves carefully near the door, set his hat beside the wall, stayed standing until Clara motioned toward the chair near the stove. He sat slowly, like a man unused to entering other people's homes. Eli stirred awake upstairs briefly. Floorboards creaked overhead. Silas looked toward the sound automatically. "My boy," Clara said quietly. Silas nodded. The fire cracked softly between them. For several minutes, neither spoke. Steam rose from the coffee Clara eventually poured into an old tin cup. She set it beside him. Their fingers nearly touched. Silas pulled his hand back first. "The coffee's weak," Clara said. "Still warm." That seemed enough for him. He drank slowly. The room settled into silence again, but it no longer felt empty. Clara returned to her sewing chair beside the lamp. Silas stared quietly into the fire. Outside, winter pressed against the house in long, cold winds. Inside, orange light moved softly across old wood walls. Then somewhere upstairs came a sleepy voice. "Mama." Clara stood immediately, but before she reached the stairs, Silas quietly rose first and lifted another log into the stove without being asked. The fire brightened instantly. Small thing, very small. Still, Clara noticed. She always noticed who helped before being told. By the time she returned downstairs, with Eli half asleep against her shoulder, Silas had moved farther from the warmth, as though trying to take up less space. Eli blinked at the stranger through tired eyes. "Who's that?" "Traveler," Clara answered softly. Silas tipped his head once toward the boy. "Evenin'." Eli buried his face against Clara again. Silas almost smiled at that. Almost. Clara laid Eli near the stove beneath blankets, while the storm deepened outside. The boy drifted back to sleep quickly. Hours later, Clara noticed Silas still awake in the chair near the fire. Most travelers she'd known filled silence because they feared it. Silas sat comfortably inside it. That alone made the room feel gentler. Near midnight, Clara's sewing slipped from tired fingers, her eyes closed without meaning to. The next thing she felt was warmth settling carefully over her shoulders. A blanket. She opened her eyes slowly. Silas had already stepped away toward the stove, adding wood quietly, keeping the fire alive. He never looked at her while he did it, never made the kindness feel heavy. Clara held the blanket close around herself, and for the first time in longer than she wanted to admit, the house did not feel like something she had to survive alone. By morning, the storm had buried the road. Snow lay heavy over the valley. The fence posts looked smaller. The barn roof groaned beneath the weight. Silas was gone from the chair. For one sharp moment, Clara thought he had left. The blanket was still around her shoulders. The cup he had used sat washed beside the basin. His hat was no longer by the door. She stood too quickly. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Then she heard the sound of an axe outside. Slow, steady, measured. She stepped to the window. Silas stood near the woodpile, splitting logs with his coat open at the throat despite the cold. Eli stood several feet away, wrapped in a quilt, watching him like he had never seen a man work without anger before. Silas lifted the axe, brought it down, split the log clean. Eli looked impressed. Silas set another piece upright. "Want to try?" Eli looked back toward the house first. Clara opened the door. "Only one," she called. Silas turned his head. "Yes, ma'am." He placed Eli's hands correctly, moved behind him, kept the axe low. Safe. They brought it down together. The log barely cracked. Eli stared at it. Then Silas nodded. "That counts." The boy smiled so wide, Clara had to look away. She had forgotten what his face looked like when it carried no worry. Later, Silas brought in the wood without being asked. He stacked it beside the stove, neat and dry. Clara stirred oats in the pot. "You don't have to do all," she said. "I know." He did not add anything. That answer stayed between them. Not proud, not pleading, just true. At breakfast, Clara set 2 bowls on the table, then stopped. Her hand hovered near the shelf. After a moment, she took down a 3rd bowl. Silas noticed, but he did not look at her. He only stood by the stove, as if waiting to be told where he belonged. Eli solved it for both of them. "You can sit there." The boy pointed to the chair beside him, not the empty chair across from Clara, not Thomas's chair, a different one. Silas looked at Clara. She gave a small nod. He sat. The meal was quiet. Oats, weak coffee, a little molasses Clara had been saving. Eli talked more than usual. He told Silas about the creek freezing, about the fox tracks near the henhouse, about how his father once tried to teach him to whistle and failed. Clara kept her eyes on her bowl. Silas listened as if every word mattered. He did not interrupt, did not correct, did not pretend the boy's small stories were smaller than a man's. When Eli ran out of words, Silas reached for his cup. "Your pa sounds like he had patience." Clara's spoon stopped. Eli nodded. He did. The room went still, but it did not break. That was the first miracle. By noon, Silas had checked the roof over the barn. By afternoon, he had repaired the stuck well handle. By evening, he had found the loose hinge on the kitchen door and tightened it. He moved through the farm like a man reading a language written in damage. A sagging beam, a cracked latch, a weak fence line, a tired horse. He saw all of it, and he fixed what he could. Clara watched from a distance. She did not thank him every time. After a while, thanks began to feel too small. That evening, the wind calmed. The world outside turned blue with cold. Clara found Silas in the barn, standing beside an old saddle hanging on a peg. Thomas's saddle. She had not touched it in 2 years. The leather was dry, one stirrup strap torn. Dust gathered along the seat. Silas did not touch it. He only looked. "That was Thomas's," Clara said from the doorway. Silas turned slowly. "Didn't mean to pry." "You weren't." She stepped inside. The barn smelled of hay, cold wood, and old memory. He used to ride out before sunrise, she said, even when there was no reason to. Said a farm listened different in the morning. Silas looked toward the gray light slipping through the boards. He was right. Clara looked at him then, not because he had said something clever, because he had not tried to take the memory from her. Most people in town avoided Thomas's name like grief was catching. Others spoke of him too loudly. As if volume could honor the dead, Silas simply let the name stand, the way a man might remove his hat before a grave. That night, Eli developed a cough. At first, Clara did not worry. Children caught cold in winter. That was ordinary. She rubbed his chest with warm cloth, gave him tea, sat beside his bed until he slept. But near midnight, the cough deepened. By 2 a.m, Eli's skin burned beneath her palm. Clara lit the lamp with shaking hands. Eli, the boy stirred, eyes glassy. Mama, I'm cold. The room was warm. That frightened her. Silas appeared in the doorway before she called. He had been sleeping in the barn again. She could tell from the hay on his sleeve and frost in his beard. He took one look at the boy and said nothing, only crossed the room and touched 2 fingers lightly to Eli's forehead. Clara saw his jaw tighten. I need the doctor, she said. Silas looked toward the window. Snow had begun again. Roads drifted shut. I know. He turned. Where's the nearest doctor? Mason Creek. That road is gone. Then I'll take the ridge. Clara stared at him. No one takes the ridge in this weather. Silas was already reaching for his coat. Then I'll go slow. She followed him downstairs. The stove threw orange light across the room. You'll freeze. Maybe. Silas lifted his hat from the peg. Clara stood between him and the door. Why would you do this? The question came out rougher than she meant. Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, because that boy asked me this morning if I'd teach him to whistle. That was all. No speech, no promise, no hero's words. Just a boy, a small request, a reason to ride through snow. Clara stepped aside. Silas opened the door. Cold rushed into the house like river water. Before he left, she grabbed the wool scarf from the hook beside the stove. It had been Thomas's. She held it out. Silas looked at it, then at her. You'll need it, she said. He took it carefully, like it was not cloth, like it was trust. Then he was gone. The hours after that did not move like hours. They stretched, they bent. They pressed Clara into the chair beside Eli's bed and would not let her rise. She cooled his forehead, changed the cloth, whispered his name when his breathing turned uneven. Once, near dawn, Eli opened his eyes and looked past her. Pennsylvania. Clara stopped breathing. The word was small, fevered, barely there, but it filled the room. She looked toward the doorway. No one stood there. Only lamplight, only winter. She lowered her head until her forehead touched the edge of Eli's blanket. Number, baby, she whispered. It's Mama. But she did not cry. Not yet. She had learned long ago that some tears had to wait until work was done. Outside, the first light of morning came pale and bitter over the snow. Then she heard hooves, not one horse. 2. Clara ran downstairs and threw open the door. Silas rode in slowly, his shoulders coated white, one hand stiff on the reins. Behind him came Dr. Harlan, hunched low in his coat, cursing softly at the weather. Silas nearly fell when he dismounted. Clara reached for him. He pulled back just enough to stay standing. Boy first, he said. Dr. Harlan hurried inside. Silas remained on the porch for a moment, breathing hard. His gloved hand shook. Clara saw ice along his sleeve, blood near his knuckles, one side of his face raw from wind. She wanted to speak. No words came. He stepped inside after the doctor called for hot water. Then he moved as if nothing in his own body mattered. He carried water, fed the stove, held the lamp steady while the doctor worked. At noon, Eli's fever broke. The boy slept, really slept. Dr. Harlan packed his bag and muttered that stubborn men were the only reason foolish rides sometimes succeeded. Silas did not answer. When the doctor left, Clara found him in the kitchen. He was standing by the stove, one hand braced against the wall. His face had gone pale. Silas, I'm all right. Number, she said. He looked at her, for the first time since he had arrived. Clara spoke with no politeness in her voice. Sit down. He sat. She warmed water, removed his gloves, saw the skin of his fingers red and cracked from cold. He tried to pull his hands away. She did not let him. The room stayed quiet. Carefully, she wrapped his hands in cloth. Her movements were firm, not delicate, not dramatic, workmanlike, tender. Because they were necessary. After a while, Silas looked toward the stairs. He asked for his father. Clara's hand stopped. Silas lowered his eyes. Fever does that. She nodded, but her throat tightened. He didn't know what he was saying. She whispered. Silas was quiet. Then he said, maybe he knew enough. Clara looked at him. There was no claim in his voice, no hunger, no pride, only sorrow handled with respect. That was when something shifted. Not love. Not yet. Something quieter. The understanding that some people enter a house and do not take more space than they are given. Some men see grief and do not try to replace it. They simply sit near the fire and keep it from going out. That evening, after Eli woke enough to drink broth, Clara went to the barn looking for Silas. She found him asleep in the hay beside his horse, not resting, collapsed. The sight struck her harder than she expected. He had ridden through a killing storm, brought back the doctor, saved her son, then returned to the barn as if the house was still not his to enter. Clara stood over him for a long while. The lantern shook in her hand. Silas opened his eyes. He sat up quickly. Sorry, ma'am. The apology hurt more than anything else. Clara looked at the frozen boards, the thin blanket, the breath of the horse steaming in the dark. Why are you out here? Silas rubbed one hand over his face. Didn't want folks talking worse about you. She stared at him. The wind moved through a crack in the barn wall. He added quietly, widow living alone already gives them enough to chew on. Clara swallowed. So you nearly froze on the ridge, then came back out here to protect my reputation. Silas did not answer. That was his answer. Clara looked away. For 3 years, people had told her what a woman alone should fear. Men, weather, debt, gossip, hunger. No one had warned her about kindness that expected nothing. No one had told her how much it could undo. She lifted the lantern. Come inside. Silas hesitated. Clara's voice softened. Not near the stove, not in the chair by the door. Inside. He stood slowly. When they entered the house, Eli was asleep upstairs, and the fire burned low. Clara walked to the table. Thomas's chair still sat across from her. The old chair. The chair she had kept in place like a promise. She did not know how to finish. She placed the lantern down. Then she gripped the back of that chair and pulled it away from the table. The wooden legs scraped softly across the floor. Silas stood still. Clara carried the chair to the wall near the window. Not hidden, not discarded, just no longer waiting. Then she took another chair from beside the stove and set it at the table, beside Eli's place. She did not look at Silas when she spoke. You should eat inside from now on. The room held the words carefully. Silas removed his hat. Yes, ma'am. Clara almost corrected him, almost told him to say her name. But the moment was already full, so she turned toward the stove and warmed the broth. 3 bowls that night, 3 spoons, 3 shadows on the wall, and the winter fire burned longer than it had in years. The next week, Mason Creek thawed just enough for the road into town to open. Clara took Eli to the mercantile for flour, salt, and lamp oil. Silas came with them, though he stayed outside near the hitching rail. He did not like town. That much was clear. Or maybe town did not like men it could not measure. Inside the store, conversation lowered the moment Clara entered. Mrs. Whitmore, the shopkeeper said, too brightly. Clara nodded. Mr. Bell was here. You're asking after you, Howard Bell. The name made her hands tighten around the flour sack. He owned the largest ranch east of the creek, also owned half the debts in town without putting his name on them. A clean coat, soft hands, eyes that smiled, only when someone owed him something. Clara said nothing. The shopkeeper leaned closer. He says the banknote is due soon. I know when my note is due. Of course. The woman behind the counter glanced toward the window where Silas stood beside Eli, showing him how to check a horse's hoof. And him. Clara looked up. What about him? The shopkeeper smiled with a pity that had teeth. People notice things. Clara placed coins on the counter. Then they can notice I paid for flour. She took the sack and walked out, but the words followed her home. That evening, she worked too hard. She scrubbed the table though it was already clean, kneaded bread dough with more force than needed, carried water until her arms shook. Silas watched without comment. Near dusk, he fixed the loose board on the porch step. Clara came outside. You don't need to fix every broken thing here. Silas looked up from the nail. Number. He tapped it in once more. Just the one someone might trip on. She wanted to stay angry. It would have been easier. Instead, she sat on the porch rail and looked out over the snowmelt running in thin lines through the yard. They're talking, she said. Silas set the hammer down. I figured. Doesn't trouble you. He looked toward the town road. Folks talked about me before I got here. For what? Silas was quiet long enough that she thought he would not answer. Then he said, for leaving places. Clara looked at him. He did not explain further. She did not ask. That was how trust grew between them, not by pulling open every wound, but by not forcing closed ones to bleed on command. A wagon rolled into the yard 3 days later. Black paint, good horses, silver trim on the harness. Howard Bell stepped down wearing gloves too fine for farm work. Clara met him on the porch. Silas was splitting wood near the barn. Eli sat on the fence watching. Howard removed his hat with perfect manners. Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Bell. He looked around the farm with the expression of a man pricing things in his head. Hard winter. Most are. I came about the note. It is not due for 26 days. Howard smiled. True, but I find it merciful to speak before the hammer falls. Clara stood straighter. Silas stopped splitting wood, only for a second. Then he continued. Howard noticed him. And who is that? A man helping with repairs. Paid. Clara's eyes hardened. Federal. Howard laughed softly. I see. The insult did not raise its voice. It did not need to. He stepped closer to the porch. Clara, a farm is no place for a woman to bleed herself dry. Thomas left you with more debt than land. You know it. I know it. The bank knows it. She said nothing. Howard's voice softened into something worse. I can settle the note. All of it. You and the boy would have security. A proper roof, respectable company. Clara knew what he meant before he said it. My wife passed 5 years ago. He continued. My house has room. Eli could have schooling. You could stop fighting weather with bare hands. From the barn. Eli watched without understanding. Silas did understand. His axe lowered. Howard smiled. Think on it. A woman alone only stays proud until winter reminds her what pride costs. Clara's face did not move. Thank you for coming. Howard waited. She gave him nothing else. At last he put his hat back on. 26 days. Mrs. Whitmore. Then he left. The wagon rolled away through mud and melting snow. For a long time, nobody moved. Then Eli climbed down from the fence. Mama. Clara forced her voice steady. Go wash for supper. The boy hesitated. Now. Eli. He obeyed. Silas remained near the woodpile. Clara turned toward the house. That night, supper was quiet in a different way. Not peaceful. Tight. Eli looked between them. Clara barely ate. Silas drank coffee slowly. After the boy went to bed, Clara took out the bank papers from the drawer. She spread them on the table. Numbers, dates, signatures, Thomas's name. Her name added later in smaller ink. Silas stood by the stove. How much? Clara laughed once without humor. Too much. He did not move. She looked up. You don't need to ask. I know. There it was again. That answer. Clara pressed one hand over the papers. This is not your trouble. Silas looked at the fire. Number. Then why are you still standing there like it is? He did not answer. The silence between them deepened. At last he said, because your boy sleeps easier here. Clara looked away first. The next morning, Silas rode into town alone. He left before Clara woke. When she came downstairs, the fire was already lit. Coffee sat warm on the stove. Eli's boots had been dried and placed near the door. On the table lay a small stack of coins, not enough to save the farm, but too much to be nothing. Clara stared at it. By afternoon, she learned what he had done. Old Mister Greeley from the stable told her while she was buying oats. Quiet fellow sold his saddle horse this morning, he said. Fine animal, too. Shame to see a man part with his last good horse. Clara walked home with the oats forgotten under her arm. Silas was repairing the south fence when she found him. Where's your horse? He kept working. Sold. Why? He drove another nail into the post. You know why. Her anger came fast because anything softer would have hurt too much. You had no right. Silas stopped, turned slowly. Number. You had no right to do that for me. His face remained calm. I did it for the boy. That made it worse. Clara stepped closer. You think that makes it easier to accept? Number. Then why? Silas looked toward the house. Because that place is the first one I've seen in years where a child still waits at the window. Clara's eyes burned. He continued quietly. Would be a shame to let a bank take that. She hated him for a moment. Not truly, but because he had touched the part of her life she kept most guarded. The part that still wanted help. The part that still wanted to be chosen without begging. She turned away. I won't be another debt you carry. Silas's voice came behind her. You're not. She stopped. What am I then? He did not answer quickly. That mattered. Finally, he said. Someone who kept the fire going when most would have let it die. Clara closed her eyes. The wind moved across the field. Far off, a crow called from the fence line. When she opened her eyes again, she walked back to the house. That evening, she did not speak through supper. Eli sensed it and stayed quiet. Silas ate little. After the dishes were washed, Clara found him packing near the barn. Not much. A bedroll, a knife, a tin cup. Thomas's scarf folded carefully on top. Her breath caught. Leaving, Silas tied the roll. Best before talk gets uglier. She stood in the barn doorway. So that is what you do. He looked at her. Leave places. The words struck. Silas accepted them without defense. Yes, Clara regretted it immediately. But pride kept her still. He lifted the bedroll. You'll have less trouble if I'm gone. Less trouble. The phrase sounded foolish once spoken into the cold air. The farm would still have debt. The fence would still need work. The town would still talk. Winter would still return. But the house would be silent again. That was the trouble she feared most. She could not say it. Silas walked past her toward the yard. At the porch, Eli opened the door. The boy saw the bedroll. His face changed. You're going. Silas stopped. For a while. That's what grown men say when they mean forever, Eli whispered. Clara put a hand to her mouth. Silas knelt slowly in the snow until he was eye level with the boy. I never lied to you. Eli's chin trembled. Then don't start now. The words were small, but they held him there. Silas looked down. For once, he had no answer. Clara stepped forward. Eli, go inside. Number. The boy's voice cracked. He fixed the well. He brought Dr. Harlan. He showed me the fox tracks. He stays quiet when you're tired. He doesn't slam doors. Silas looked away. Eli kept going. Pa used to stay. The yard went still. Clara felt the whole winter inside that sentence. Silas rose slowly. He looked at Clara then, not asking her to stop him, not asking to be allowed, only waiting for truth. Clara could not give it yet, not with the town's eyes, not with Thomas's chair against the wall, not with fear still living in her ribs. So Silas nodded once. A man could survive many things, but not being half invited. He turned and walked down the road. The snow had stopped. His footprints marked the yard clearly. Eli ran to the porch rail but did not follow. Clara stood behind him. Neither moved until Silas became smaller than the fence posts. That night, the house returned to its old shape. 2 bowls, 2 cups, too much silence. The fire burned low. Clara tried to mend a shirt, but threaded the needle wrong 3 times. Eli sat by the window. He's not coming back, is he? Clara looked at the stove. I don't know. That was not enough. She knew it. The boy wiped his face with his sleeve. Clara went to him and knelt. Eli turned toward her. Why do people leave us? The question had no answer a mother could give without breaking something. So Clara held him. The fire popped behind them, outside. Darkness gathered over the farm. Near dawn, Clara woke in the chair. The fire had almost gone out. A thin gray light filled the room. For a moment, she thought she heard an axe again, but there was only wind. She rose slowly and opened the door. Cold air entered. The yard lay empty. Then she saw it. The north fence. Every last rail repaired. Posts straight. Wire tightened. Gate rehung. Silas had finished it before leaving. She stepped onto the porch barefoot. Snow bit her skin. Near the bottom step lay one of his gloves, worn through at the fingers. Forgotten or left. She did not know. Clara picked it up. The leather was stiff with cold. Eli appeared behind her wrapped in a blanket. Is that his? Clara could not speak. The boy took it from her hands. Then he ran. Eli. He did not stop. He ran down the road in his nightshirt and boots, clutching the glove like it was proof enough to bring a man back. Clara followed. Her coat open, hair loose, breath sharp in the morning air. They found Silas beyond the creek road. He was walking beside a borrowed mule with no saddle. only his bedroll across one shoulder. At the sound of Eli calling his name, he stopped. The boy crashed into him hard enough to make him stagger. Silas stood frozen. Then slowly, carefully, he set one hand on the back of Eli's head. Clara stopped several steps away. The sun had not fully risen. Everything was pale. Snow, sky, road, breath. Eli held out the glove. "You fortiedi this." Silas looked at it, then at Clara. She walked closer. There were 100 things she could have said. "Thank you. I'm sorry. Don't go. I'm afraid. The house is colder without you." But none of those were right. Not enough. Too much. So she said the first true thing. "The fire went low after you left." Silas looked at her quietly. Clara swallowed. "You can sit by it again." The wind moved between them. Then she added, softer than before, "If you still want to." Silas held her gaze. His face did not change much, but something in his eyes gave way. Not weakness, rest. He looked down at Eli, then back toward the Whitmore place, small and worn beneath the morning sky. "I sold my horse," he said. Clara almost smiled through the ache in her chest. "We have a barn." A pause. He looked at the glove in Eli's hand. Then he nodded once. "All right." No kiss, no music, no grand promise, just a man turning back. Sometimes that is enough to change a life. By evening, there were 3 bowls on the table again. The house smelled of bread and smoke. Eli fell asleep before finishing his supper, his cheek resting beside his spoon. Silas reached across without a word and moved the boy's cup so it would not spill. Clara saw it. She always saw it. The banknote still waited in the drawer. Howard Bell still existed. Winter had not become kinder, but the room had changed. Silas sat beside the fire, mending the torn glove with careful stitches. Clara worked near the lamp, sewing a patch onto Eli's coat. The old chair stood by the wall, not forgotten, not needed at the table anymore. After a while, Clara rose and placed another log into the stove. The flames lifted. Silas looked up. She turned toward him. "Would you light the lamp?" He stared at her for half a second, then stood. He struck the match, touched flame to wick, set the glass carefully back in place. Warm light spread through the room. Clara sat down again. Outside, Mason Creek disappeared into another cold night. Inside, the fire held. And for the first time in years, Clara Whitmore did not listen for what was missing. She listened to what had stayed. If this story kept you watching until the end, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories.